All right, everyone. Welcome to the GPU webinar series. My name is Krista McConnell, and I'm an education specialist and the thematic lead for early childhood education here at the Global Partnership for Education. I'm very excited to present today a webinar we have on mainstreaming early childhood education into education sector planning. And we have a fantastic group of speakers here today. I admit I'm also part of the group that designed this course, but we're really happy to have everyone here today presenting the course and sharing more insights on what is in the course, as well as opening up to questions in the audience. I'm here in Washington, D.C., joined by my colleagues who are helping me put on this webinar. And then we also have our fabulous group of presenters from around the world. So in New York, we have Evelina Borisova from UNICEF headquarters. And then connected in Paris, we have Yoshikaga from UNESCO headquarters, as well as Diane Corey from IEP, or UNESCO IEP, and Hannah Medri, also from UNESCO IEP. Before we dive into today's webinar, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. Kind of the key part of one of the reasons why we wanted to have this webinar is to be able to open it up to questions that people have about this upcoming course. So we really want to make sure that we have at least kind of a half an hour at the end to go over question and answer. So it's really important that you who are online right now participating and listening to this webinar are able to share your questions with us. And there are two ways to do that. The first is to use the YouTube live chat feature that you have. So feel free in kind of the chat box to mention which question you have. And if it's for a certain presenter, you can indicate that. If not, I'll help direct it to the appropriate presenter. The other way that you can also send us questions, and I'll be able to feed them back to the presenters so that they are answered, is to send an email to webinars@globalpartnership.org. Again, that's webinars@globalpartnership.org, and we'll be able to make sure that that question is read out loud and answered by our panelists. The other housekeeping item I have today is that the session will be recorded. So all of you who have registered for this webinar will receive a link to the recordings, both in French and English, probably in the next 2 to 3 days. So stay tuned. If I know if some of you may need to leave early, or you have other colleagues or people in your network who are interested in learning more about this course, you can definitely share the link with them. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to our first presenter, handing it over to you, Eva, in New York.
Great. Thanks so much, Kristen. Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Excellent. I think we can move on to the next slide. I think you introduced the course already. So I will do a very brief overview of why this MOOC is in existence. Who is the target audience, what we're roughly trying to cover, and which pathways are available to take the course, and how can we be engaged, how can you all be engaged in this course. I'm only going to take just a few moments to take you through the why and the who of these first questions, and then I'll be handing over to colleagues at IIP to speak more about the actual content of the course and to give you a sense of how exactly there's ways to take it and what to expect and how exciting some of the pathways are. But without further ado, I think, Kristen, we can go into the first slide and talk a little bit about the why on this MOOC. So I think that the first question that we hope to answer is to what extent we are making progress in the space of early childhood education and why this course came into existence among the partners that you've heard from already. I think hopefully many of you on the line are familiar with the evidence and the importance of early childhood education, not just for the success of children, but also for the success of education systems. From a partner's perspective, all the partners who came together behind this MOOC, we felt that the evidence was very strong and very well documented. And yet, when we looked at the numbers, we're seeing that the subsector is lagging significantly behind compared to the way other subsectors are moving. And of course, we have an incredibly ambitious target under SDG 4.2, setting the expectation that we will reach universal quality pre-primary education by 2030. However, when we look at the numbers, we're far from reaching this goal. And you can see some of these numbers on the slide. We're about at 50% enrollment globally. And in low and low-income countries, the numbers look much worse. I think in emergency settings, they're even worse than that. So clearly, there's a lot of progress that needs to take place. It is a severely underfinanced subsector. I think many of you probably have seen some of these statistics from a global early learning report that came out earlier this year. You can see it on the screen, A World Ready to Learn, which has a lot more data and facts on where we are with this subsector. We see large equity gaps, and certainly in terms of quality, lots of challenges with respect to teachers, availability of teachers, training of teachers, and lack of quality standards. So overall, the feeling among all of us, I think, has been that this is such an important area of work, and it can really drive progress for a whole education system, and yet we're not seeing the progress that's needed. We can move on to the next slide. When we started looking more closely at what is really holding this subsector back, of course, there are many, many challenges that probably those of you working in the field are very closely familiar with. We know there are issues with respect to teacher training. We know there are issues with respect to availability of programs, the scale of the programs that exist, the lack of data for the subsector. We know there's a lot of challenges also with respect to capacity. Given that in many countries this is a new area of work, ministries of education as well as early childhood education directorates often don't have the skills or the capacity to really plan and implement at scale. So if we're really looking at scaling up the response for the subsector, really supporting better implementation at scale, when we started thinking about the best pathway to see some progress here, we sort of kept coming back to the biggest challenge, which is that early childhood education really is still on the margins of education sector plans. So if we expect governments, and hopefully we have some of you on the line today, ministries of education, policymakers to make significant progress for young children and to include the subsector systematically in education sector plans, to finance it and to budget appropriately, then we really need to make sure we're building their capacity to make sure that's possible. And again, from our kind of joint partner experience, there was a strong feeling that that capacity to plan for early childhood education programs, to cost, to budget, and to develop strong plans wasn't always there, simply because it's a very new subsector that requires quite a different set of skills to make that possible. If you move on to the next slide, in a way, this hopefully summarizes the key points that I've made so far. I think we're hoping that through this MOOC, through this massive online course that we're launching at the end of October, that we could turn the dial on early childhood education a little bit from making it what seems to be now a low priority subsector in terms of planning and budgeting to a high priority subsector, which is what we think is needed to really make the progress that's required to meet the SDG target 4.2. Next slide. I'm going to go through these very quickly. So what is the framework of the course? Well, hopefully it's not surprising to hear that given the broader objective I just mentioned, the framework for this MOOC is the ESP process, which I think and I hope many of you are familiar with. And if you're not, through this course, you will become very closely familiar with it. The ESP cycle, which many countries follow, begins with an education sector analysis, moves on to education sector plan, a budget, and of course an implementation sort of part of the plan, which leads to monitoring, sector review, evaluation, and back at the beginning. What all of us as partners, and I think hopefully many of you would agree, felt that it's really important to, if our vision is to ensure that early childhood education is a significant part of sector plans that are being developed, then we should make sure that it's embedded and integrated at each one of these steps. Of course, the first step is certainly very, very critical. If we are lacking data for early childhood education, really difficult to make sure that it's a part of a plan, but all the steps are equally important. So this course really follows the ESP cycle and tries to put early childhood education into the context of what hopefully many policy planners are already familiar with. Next slide. And then in terms of the specific goals and objectives, again, some of these hopefully I've covered already. But this course is an interesting one. There are a number of courses out there just on sector planning, and there's also a number of courses on early childhood development and education as a technical area of expertise. What we wanted to do is actually bring those two different types of expertise and area of work together. And so it really is an intersection between technical early childhood education aspects with a more kind of broader sector planning work that, again, many policymakers and many education planners are familiar with. In a way, then, this course is an introduction to how those pieces fit together. The overall objective, I think, is, as you see it on the screen, is really to provide education planners, early childhood education officers, partners, and really all stakeholders involved in delivering early childhood education programs with a broad orientation as to why mainstreaming early childhood education in sector plans matters and how we might be able to be successful in doing that. Of course, we can't do everything in 5 weeks, but we hope that this is a very good starting point for many of you and for many of us who are trying to solve some of these bigger puzzles. Next slide. I'll talk briefly about the target audience, and hopefully all of you are already finding yourself in this broader narrative. Certainly the audience that we had in mind is quite broad because it's an introductory course, and yet we felt that at least the first two sets of key stakeholders that we'd like to reach are education planners, those who might have had quite a bit of experience planning within the education sector, but maybe limited experience with planning for early childhood education specifically. Again, given that this is a relatively new and kind of emerging subsector, we felt that that would be a very important set of stakeholders to engage. Then we're also looking to engage early childhood education officers, managers, program implementers, early childhood education partners who invest in this area and for whom this way of looking at the subsector might actually be very significant and strategic as well. And then, of course, everybody else, all relevant stakeholders, national, regional, global, who are supporting pre-primary programs, early childhood education programs, and could benefit from a fresh way of looking at the space and the way to make progress. And then the last thing, next slide, the last thing I wanted to cover is how you might consider taking this course. And there's, of course, many ways to engage in a massive online course. The most exciting part about it is that hopefully there will be a lot of other participants taking the course together, a lot of space for collaboration and for exchanging of both information, tools, ideas, and solutions, which I think we're very interested in as well. You could take this course alone, depending on where you are, or you can take it with colleagues in your offices, in your ministries of education, you know, in the organizations where you work. We're really encouraging, if possible, to consider forming a country team of either education planners and early childhood education officers together, which of course would be ideal because those two set of stakeholders might be coming together for the first time, similar to the way this course was envisioned. And I know some countries are looking into those kind of models where country teams could sit together and go through the course content week by week. And as colleagues from IAP will take us through the course content, you will get a sense of how that might be possible. You might consider using an existing early childhood education technical working group at a country or even at a regional level and engaging that technical working group through the course as well. Treat it as really an amazing opportunity for capacity building, and any way that you see this being helpful beyond you as an individual, we highly encourage you to be creative and to find ways to engage other colleagues in that. And with that, I think I'm handing it over to colleagues at IAP to talk a little bit more about the course content. Diane and Hannah, over to you.
Thank you very much, Evelina. So we will now look at the course content. As said earlier, this MOOC is an introduction to the key concepts, processes, and tools to ensure that pre-primary education is adequately and successfully mainstreamed into the ESP cycle. This requires an understanding of the ESP process and how pre-primary can be addressed and mainstreamed at each step of planning, starting with the plan preparation. The MOOC contains 5 modules to be covered over the course of 5 weeks. Next slide, please. So Module 1 introduces participants to the terminologies and benefits related to pre-primary education provision, as well as the rationale for integrating pre-primary into education sector plans. Later in this presentation, my colleague Hannah will take you on a tour of this first module for a more in-depth look. Next slide, please. In Module 2, can we see the slide? Oops. Okay, I don't know. So in Module 2, participants will be provided with an overview of both the key feature of the pre-primary subsector and the overall education sector plan preparation process. Participants will learn what a coherent pre-primary subsector looks like and will be able to identify the main aspects and phases of education sector planning, including key challenges for early childhood education. Next slide, please. It's difficult to know what happened.
Sorry, from DC, we're having.
We don't see
the slides dropped. We're working on that. If you're comfortable talking through Module 3, we'll catch up and add the slides when we can.
Okay, so you are in Module 3?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So in Module 3, we will look at the first step of the plan preparation process, the education sector analysis, or what we also call the ESA. As Evelina said, the ESA is a very important part of the ESP, as the ESP builds on the finding of the ESA. So it is critical for the ESA to take into account the key dimensions that are important for pre-primary education. So in this model, we will look at the major processes for developing and conducting an ESA, how the major areas of analysis for pre-primary can be approached, and how to address specific ECE challenges, such as data constraints and coordination issues. Next slide, please. We can go for Module 4?
Yes, go ahead to Module 4.
Okay. So building on the evidence of the ESA, Module 4 introduces the next phases of the plan preparation process. It looks at how to formulate ECE policies and set well-costed realistic objectives, programs, targets, and timelines for the pre-primary subsector. This will include an overview of tools and methods such as problem and objective trees and the logical framework approach with pre-primary country examples. Participants will also be introduced on how to assess the financial viability of pre-primary policies and targets using financial pre-primary education simulation models. Next slides, please. Can we move on Module 5?
Yes, please. Sorry, we're having some technical difficulties showing the slide, but if you're comfortable
yeah, sure.
presenting Module 5, then we'll try to catch up with you.
Okay, so in Module 5, we will provide guidance on the implementation arrangement and capacity needed to implement an effective plan and related pre-primary subsector programs. The module also introduces participants to key monitoring and evaluation concepts, processes, and tools related to pre-primary education monitoring, and provide an overview on how to construct sound pre-primary education indicators. Indeed, a coherent EC monitoring and evaluation system helps to ensure that relevant and high-quality pre-primary programs are being implemented, and the most disadvantaged groups are sufficiently targeted. The model will then conclude with a brief overview of the plan finalization procedures. I will hand it over now to Hannah, who will show you a little bit more in depth how the model works.
Okay, so if we can have the next slide, please. A unique aspect of this MOOC is that we offer 3 different learning profiles or pathways to accommodate the diversity of our participants. During the pre-phase, participants will take a quiz that will direct them to the appropriate pathway for them, depending on what they hope to get out of the course and how much time they have left. So as you can see, we have the curious, the graduate, and the champion profiles. Next slide, please. So the curious learning profile is the lightest option for those who would like to gain some knowledge but have limited time. They will be expected to review all of the main resources for each module, which means watch the videos and the animated presentation and study the reader. They will also be required to take the mandatory quiz for each module.
And at the end of the course, they will receive a certificate of participation. Next slide. The graduate profile is for those who would like to actively participate in the MOOC and really take it full on. So in addition to watching and studying all of the resources and taking the quiz, they must also complete the main activity of each module. And they will receive a certificate of completion at the end of the course. Next slide, please. Then the champion profile is for those who really want to go above and beyond. They will have to complete an extra second prepare activity for each module, which usually calls for a deeper analysis. They will receive a certificate of completion with honors. Next slide. So this will all become a lot clearer as we take a quick tour of the course, which we're going to do now. Next slide. So welcome to our course platform. What we see here is the pre-phase, which will take place from October 23rd to 27th. In our pre-phase, there's an introductory video and a chance for participants to introduce themselves. They will have to read the course guide, which provides an outline of the next 5 weeks, and then they will test their knowledge on what they have learned about the platform and the course. This is also where they will take the quiz to discover their learning profile. So now let's take a deeper look at all of the resources for Module 1. Each module is led by a different instructor who will explain the work instructions for that week. So we see here that Yoshi is our lead instructor for Module 1. After watching the work instructions to know what they have to do for that week, next slide, participants will then get to watch an inspirational video. So they will click on the Get Inspired icon that we see here on the right. Next slide. These videos are a fun way to introduce the module and get everyone excited about what's coming up. So let's go ahead and watch the inspirational video for Module 1. Next slide, and you can start the video.
Maya is 5 years old and lives in a village with her family. Maya's parents have just heard about the new community pre-primary program and are trying to decide whether or not to enroll Maya. Maya's parents may not have heard, but there are many benefits to pre-primary. Let's take a look at what Maya's life could be with or without pre-primary. The early childhood years are crucial for a child's cognitive, social, physical and emotional development. It is during these years that most of children's brain development occurs. Quality pre-primary offers the stimulating and nurturing environment that children need in order to develop core skills. Early childhood education also plays a role in fostering family engagement at home, which further contributes to a child's development and learning. It also boosts children's school readiness and helps ensure children's success at school. Indeed, children who have attended quality pre-primary are shown to have higher learning outcomes and are less likely to repeat grades or drop out of school. Attending quality pre-primary implies a better chance of achieving a longer education, leading to a more productive, healthy life as an adult. This contributes to the disruption of the cycle of inequities. Another positive aspect of sending children to preschool is that it allows mothers to engage in employment and older sisters to stay in school. SDG 4 calls for ensuring all children have access to quality pre-primary education as a major equalizer, allowing everyone the opportunity for a good start in life. Maya's parents eventually decide to send her to the community pre-primary program. They are making a good decision. Early childhood education is one of the best investments one can make, not only for children, but also for society at large. However, in order to provide quality ECE pre-primary services to all children like Maya, a strong pre-primary subsector is needed with robust planning and sufficient resources, which is what we will look at in this course. So, let's get started.
Okay, next slide, please. So now that we've met Maya, who is our mascot for the course, we can start in on the content for Module 1 by clicking on the watch icon on the right. Next slide. This brings us to the animated presentation, which presents all of the main content of the module. We will not watch this now, but we can just take a quick look at a few of the slides so you have an idea of what this looks like. Next slide, please. All of the animated presentations are split into several sections. So as we can see, the Module 1 presentation will cover ECE concepts, the benefits of investing in ECE, and why ECE should be in an ESP. Next slide. And here we see one of the images within the presentation that illustrates the ECE concepts. Next slide, please. Next, participants must study the module reader by clicking on the read icon. Next slide. Here they will download the module reader, which is a comprehensive document that goes much deeper into all the content of the module. The reader also provides other relevant ECE sources for that module. Next slide. After watching the videos and studying the reader, all profiles must then complete the check activities for the week by clicking on the check icon. Next slide. The check section always includes a mandatory quiz. In some modules, there's also an extra drag and drop check exercise. Next slide. So now we're going to split off to the requirements for the graduate and champion profiles by clicking on the prepare icon. Next slide. Graduate and champions will find here what activities they are required to prepare for that week. Next slide. The first activity for Module 1 is creating ECE stakeholder cards to reflect on who is impacted by ECE. As said, both graduate and champion profiles must complete this first activity. Next slide. They must choose 3 stakeholders and complete a card describing if they think that person is interested in ECE and why, as well as what further information they should have about the benefits of ECE. They will then post the cards in discussion threads to compare with other students who chose the same stakeholders. Next slide, please. The second prepare activity for Module 1, which is just for champions, is to create a poster campaign to raise awareness about why ECE should be mainstreamed into education sector plans. They can then share their posters on social media and will vote on the best one, which will be showcased at the end of the week. Next slide, please. Each module also has an optional poll, which we see by clicking on the vote icon. Next slide. The poll questions are related to the content of that module and allow participants a chance to share information about their country's pre-primary context and compare it with others. As soon as they answer the poll question, they will immediately see what their colleagues have responded. Next slide. There's also a designated Connect discussion forum for each module. Next slide, please. This space gives participants a chance to share questions and ideas about the module content and activities. We also provide a few optional discussion questions to stimulate debate and further reflection. Next slide, please. Finally, at the end of each week, the lead instructors will post a wrap-up video in which they provide an overview of the module, showcase assignments, and discuss issues and reflections that were raised. So each module will follow the same formula. So as you can see, there's a diverse variety of fun, engaging resources available to participants and many opportunities to share and learn from each other. I'll now pass it on to my colleague Yoshi, who will describe how to sign up for this course.
Hi. So let me say thank you very much for your participation. It's been very, very exciting for us to be able to work together across 3 different organizations, GPE, UNICEF, and UNESCO. And we are really looking forward to the launch of this program. We like to inform you of a few things at the end of this presentation. So first of all, please keep in mind that the registration deadline is October 28th. Actually, this is the deadline that we set in order for us to be able to have the people who are going to register at the last minute, because we want to be inclusive and we would like as many people to participate in our MOOC. But this being said, please bear in mind that as our colleagues earlier said, there will be a pre-phase week starting on the 23rd of October until the 27th of October. So we will very much encourage you to, of course, start with this pre-phase attendance because you'll get to know the platform and you'll get to know more or less how the MOOC would work on this virtual platform. So please be ready to start your participation on the 23rd of October. So we would like all of you to spread the word, of course. As we said earlier, this is the very first MOOC that we have developed on integrating early childhood education into our education sector planning. So it's a really first initiative that we are launching, and we really welcome everybody's participation. So in terms of the next steps, we are looking forward to your participation and feedback on the course content, of course, and how you might have felt about using certain functions or participating in some activities. Maybe you have some opinions about the country examples that we have highlighted in the readers. We welcome all kinds of feedback from you because since this is really the first time that we developed this, we would like to improve this MOOC with your feedback. So it's very important that we get your opinions and feedback. With this, we're going to analyze, of course, all what we receive from you. And then we will take stock of our experiences, and we'd like to think about where we could improve more for the future purposes. Now, for next year, 2020, we do have a plan to create the French version of this MOOC because that's the language for which we do have quite a lot of demands for. So please stay tuned for development of this French version of the MOOC. Now we put at the last point a teaser video that you're welcome to share with your constituencies or your partners. This is the participants
up to now.
Registered. So we are very pleased to let you know that actually we have 2,559 participants that have been registered for this MOOC. So it's a great accomplishment, and yes, we are very excited about it. So you see at the bottom, to register for this MOOC, please visit at.iip.unesco.org/ECE MOOC. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Yoshi, and thank you to all of our presenters. I think this was extremely informative, and it's exciting to already hear the large demand for the MOOC, 2 weeks before the registration deadline. So that's wonderful to hear. This webinar right now is being very well attended by people all over the world. We're hearing people chime in to the live stream on YouTube and announce where they're coming from, and we're also starting to receive some questions. So at this point, I would like to turn it over to the question and answer portion of the webinar. So please, for those of you who are joining us online, I know you probably have burning questions about your own participation in this course, or other colleagues, or other people within your network you could think that this course would be relevant for. So please feel free to use the YouTube link, the chat function there, to announce your question, and I'll be able to read that and get it answered now. Or feel free to send us an email at webinars@globalpartnership.org, and we'll be able to address your question that way. But it's exciting. We already have a few questions that have come in, and just some easy logistic questions that I'm sure a lot of you have. I think I'll direct these back to Paris, back to IAP, to be able to answer. But a couple of just overall logistics questions. The first is, I understand you have these 3 different learning personas, but how much time per week should I plan to invest in the course based on these learning personas? The second question is similar. Someone's asking, if I cannot participate one of the weeks of the course, how does this affect my overall learning and completion of the course? And the last question was, is this course self-paced, or can I make it self-paced? So I'll hand it back to you in Paris to answer those first 3 questions that we have. And again, to everyone else on the line, please feel free to send us your questions.
Thank you so much, Kristen. So of course, it depends on the pace of the student, but a rough estimate is 2 hours per week for the curious profile, 3 to 4 hours per week for the graduate, and 4 to 5 hours per week for champions. The course guide that I mentioned in the pre-phase also provides a breakdown of the expected time to complete each activity, because that will vary a bit between module. The deadline for assignments will be on Sundays, with the exception of the last module, so that will allow participants to catch up on the activities if they didn't have time to prepare them during the week. But with that said, we will allow 1 late activity submission throughout the course, just 1, to give you a little wiggle room. But it will be expected that you complete that activity before the course finishes. And it is not self-paced. As we said, all the deadlines are by the end of the week.
Great, and one quick follow-up to that. Do you have to pay for the course or pay for certification from the course?
Nope, it's all free, open to everyone. So yes, take advantage.
Great. I have a second kind of grouping of questions related to the policy cycle. So a country is asking, where they are in the policy cycle. I know we had a slide earlier that described that this course will mainly deal with the ESA and the ESP. So the question I have, my country has recently completed both its education sector analysis and its education sector plan. Is it worthwhile for me to still participate in this course now? Or is it better to take the course when we are in the next analysis and planning phase? So I think I'll address this question to Eva in UNICEF in New York.
Sure, that's a great question. I hope you don't wait until your next cycle to take the course. No, I think if you recall, the broader objective for the course is really to provide all participants with a kind of critical knowledge of concepts, processes, tools that really would help them better understand how to integrate pre-primary education into sector plans. And it doesn't matter if a sector plan has already taken place, partly because there's other moments in that ESP cycle where that knowledge and experience and understanding could really help participants. For example, even if you have already completed an ESA or an ESP, and we hope that early childhood education is in there, you will have an opportunity to revisit that during the implementation part of the cycle, as well as during a joint sector review. So there never really is a bad moment to really think about early childhood education with respect to sector planning. And certainly if there are countries or policymakers that are beginning the thinking about the next policy cycle, ideal moment, but not the only moment. And hopefully we'll convince you throughout this course that at any point of the sector planning process, there is space and opportunity to consider either revision of what's in the plan or adding components related to pre-primary education that could strengthen the overall plan as well. I think just to reiterate that really the broad objective for this course is to equip all participants with both knowledge and tools to be stronger advocates for this subsector, to find ways that that this subsector could be meaningfully integrated into all the stages of the plan, and being more critical kind of implementers with respect to how we think about early childhood education at scale. What are the ways that key progress monitoring indicators could be strengthened? What are the ways that capacity building could be improved? I think by and large, we believe that all countries, regardless of where they are on the ESP cycle, could benefit from this, as well as partners who are supporting countries in that process. I hope that answers the question. Kristen, over to you.
Great, thank you. One question that just came in is, will there be another MOOC on this theme in the future? I think they were asking particularly in English. The timing for this one is rather tricky for most of our academic staff in Lesotho who have set prior engagements in the weeks of the course. So I think I'll direct this question back to Paris and add one more that also came in. I think related to gender. We have a kind of a group of questions about how does this course relate to the ongoing work on gender responsive education sector planning? Given that gender norms and stereotypes get formed at such a young age, how does gender equality get integrated into this MOOC? So I'll turn it back over to Paris to kind of answer those two sets of questions.
In regards to the first question, for now we don't have any set plans to have another MOOC in English, but it does depend on the demand and how this first course goes. So I'd say stay tuned for that. But as of now, right now, the plan is just to have it in French next year.
But also, any participant could then follow the MOOC after its completion. It will remain open, so they can then follow it on their own space, but there will be no certification. But they can still download all the documents, they can follow all the modules, which is already very informative. So that's one way to do it.
So yes, I'll be pleased to take the other question about gender mainstreaming. So thank you very much for this question. I think it's a very important question to address. Let me say that all our organizations are very much committed to gender mainstreaming. That's really one of the biggest priorities of our entities. Of course, the SDG 4.2 does explicitly say achieve by 2030 that all girls and boys will have access to quality early childhood care and education. So the concern about gender equality, boys and girls, are addressed really explicitly in the target itself. Now, in terms of the MOOC, I think we can sort of let you know that, first of all, in the module 1, when we talk about the concepts related to early childhood education and or pre-primary education, we say that one of the major benefits that early childhood education brings to the society is about gender equality. So if we have more provision of early childhood education, then the mothers will have more chances to work outside. If there are girl siblings who are more elder than the young child, then she will not have to stay at home to take care of their young child, their young siblings. So that way we can encourage girls' education and encourage them to continue their educational progression. Also, as the question pointed out, precisely the gender socialization begins very early in life. Gender stereotyping is formed, attitude towards boys and girls, it becomes formed in the early years. So we do address this important aspect of being conscious of what takes place within early childhood programs. So that's really addressed in the MOOC. Now, in terms of sort of the principle of ESP and ESA, we do address gender as a cross-cutting issue, so that's very prominent. Of course, gender is part of this inclusive agenda, so we don't highlight just the gender mainstreaming as the only thing that we need to take care of, but then also we take care about other factors of exclusion, such as disability, such as children in emergency situations, children with different languages that are not taught in the early childhood centers. So we do really take serious this principle, and then to make sure that it's embedded in the whole process of mainstreaming early childhood education in the ESP. Now, in terms of sort of the module 3, which is about the ESA, so we do address the importance of disaggregating indicators and data by sex, by different factors like exclusion, if possible, and also in the modules we do have suggested questions that countries can raise when they are tackling education. So are there gender disparities in access? Are the facilities accessible and gender responsive? Are there gender disparities in training participation? So all these issues are embedded in our course design. So that would be some of our answers.
Great, thank you, Yoshi. A few new questions just came in that I thought I'd bring up to the full group. Well, first of all, to just quickly summarize, it sounded like Diane's answer to the first question is anyone who's remotely interested in this course should register, because just by registering, you have access to materials that you can read at your own time, even if you aren't able to fully take the course. So just kind of encouraging all who are at least remotely interested in this course to check it out in more detail and decide which persona you'd like to take. All right, so a few new questions that just came in. Which countries will this course specifically help? Will costing for early childhood development be covered as a topic? And can you please provide the registration link in the email to the webinar? On the last question, I will answer that yes, I think it's actually in the registration link, but as we resend, anyone who's registered for this webinar will receive in a few days' time links to both the PowerPoint presentation as well as the recordings of this session, and we'll make sure in the body of that email to also include a registration link for the MOOC. So I think I'll quickly turn it back over to Paris to answer kind of the first two questions about which countries will this help and will costing of early childhood services be covered in the course.
So far, the MOOC is the target groups, the target country groups are mainly low-income and middle-income countries, especially low-income countries where we see major constraints that the EC subsector is facing, such as issues related to coordination, challenges, low funding for the subsector, and where we also see major issue related to access and quality. So the tools that are, and the different tools, the different materials will be very relevant for those countries in order for them to make sure that they're able to strengthen the EC focus within their education sector plan. But this said, even middle-income countries will find their way, and we believe that also they may have different issues pertaining to ECE. There will still be resources that will, and perhaps also description of processes, of tools that will be relevant for them. And there is much, takeaway points that could be also relevant for them. So far, it's very open to any countries that wants to make that wants to provide a stronger EC focus into their planning. Regarding the costing, a whole section is devoted to costing. We will be addressing costing and financing issues in two major models. In Model 3, in the ESA, the education sector model, education sector analysis model. In this model, we will be looking at the different, we will look at unit cost of the different ECE models. We will be also addressing financing issues. For instance, we will be looking at the budget, the share of the education budget that is devoted to primary education. We will look also how this budget is being disaggregated by component. For instance, what goes to salary, what goes to learning and teaching material, which is a key important, core component for quality, delivering quality education. And also, in the Model 4 that addresses the plan preparation itself, we will be using what we call the financial simulation model that allows to cost the various policies against the targets that was set, and also the objectives that the plan is setting for ECE. So participants will kind of be introduced to these tools and also have a chance to use a simplified version of a simulation model to assess how much, to assess different policy options related to ECE and see and assess the financial implication of certain policy choices. For instance, if you have a child-teacher ratio of this amount, what are the implications on the wage bill and then on the whole costing of the policy? So costing is really a full component of this MOOC.
Kristen, may I just add one quick point?
Sure, and then Eva, I have a question for you after that.
Sure. No, I just wanted to go back to the overall objective that I mentioned at the start of the presentation, so that we set the expectations right for participants. I think in 5 weeks we can only do as much as we can do, and I think this group working together on the course has really kind of tried the best we can to bring in all the relevant tools and resources that we thought were helpful in an introductory course. But I think it's really important to highlight that this really is just an introductory course to this really rather complex and very nuanced space in terms of planning for early childhood education at scale. So while I think, for example, on issues on costing and budgeting, as Diane mentioned, there's a robust set of resources in the course. We all know what it takes to put some of these resources in practice is sort of the next level of skills and opportunities to really put those in the context of your countries, in the context of programs, and to test them out to figure out how it all works. So I think it's really important to reiterate that this is a very complex space, certainly both from a planning and technical perspective, and unpacking all that in 5 weeks, you can imagine that it's a lot of content. I think it's going to be a fantastic learning experience and capacity building for many of the participants in the course, but it's very much just sort of the beginning of a much deeper dive that we hope all of you will be able to do in your countries in the context of the work that you're doing as well.
Thank you, Eva, for that clarification. We do only have a few more minutes. I have 2 remaining questions. One I'll direct to you, Eva, in New York, and the last one I'll direct back to Paris. This question is related to your earlier slide about participants. I think there was a lot of talk about the target audience being education officials and planning officials and some other people related to early childhood. But I have a question from someone who's working in civil society or academia about how relevant this course is for them, if they might be less involved in the day-to-day planning part. And the second part of this question is if someone works in early childhood development, but maybe not from the education sector, from one of the other sectors, because this course is billed as mainstreaming early childhood education in education sector planning. We're wondering about the relevance to participants still working in early childhood, but maybe not necessarily in purely the education space.
Sure. Do you want me to take both? I can take the first one and hand it over to Paris for the second one, or either way.
That was two parts of one broader
Of
topic
the same
about
question.
criticism,
Okay,
and
got
then
it. Great.
I have one more
Go ahead.
question for Paris after this.
Great. Well, I can quickly answer the two parts of this question. I think in short, hopefully we've convinced you that this course is relevant to everyone. Certainly education sector planning and policymakers and partners who are involved in those processes on a day-to-day basis and in a very systematic way would find this most informative. But academic partners, civil society organizations, and small NGOs implementing programs on the ground, I think would find the lens of the course and the way the information is presented quite relevant to the programs they're likely supporting. I think one key feature of this course and of the overall discourse it opens is really to consider system strengthening and subsector development as a core aspect of the work that we're all doing, irrespective of whether we're donors, partners, governments, civil society organizations, and academic partners. I think if we really want to see the change that we need to see in the subsector, the push towards SDG 4.2 and universal access, ideally we're all in alignment with respect to how we support governments and systems to deliver quality early childhood education at scale. And from that angle, really all of us are contributing to the same picture and to the same goal. So this alignment that we could reach through the content of this course could be really helpful. So even if you're implementing a very small scale project in one district of a country, you might find through this course how you could position that project to really support broader level efforts and national ambition in this subsector. So I think really it will be quite helpful to anybody who's working in this space, and it might be a little bit of a stretch for someone who is not so familiar with sector planning processes, but certainly very interesting, hopefully, and will keep them curious about how everything fits together. And then on the second question, similarly, early childhood education, of course, is a component of a broader early childhood development space where we know issues like health, hygiene, nutrition, parent engagement are all really critical. And if we want early childhood education services to be successful in delivering results for children, we know that some of these inputs are just as important. And I think the course does a pretty good job at bringing in some of those elements in relevant places to be considered. I think how we plan for pre-primary education also means how we work with other ministries, how we make sure that some of these other inputs are a part of the broader discussion. And at the end of the day, it's about budget. But I think it's still really important to consider where some of these elements from other sectors could fit in. So again, I think probably a very interesting way to take this course, even if you're not working directly in early childhood education, but are working more broadly in the early childhood development space. Over.
Great. Thank you, Eva. Lastly, I'm conscious of time. I have two quick questions for Paris to answer, and then we'll do a quick wrap up. So thank you everyone who's participated so far. My two quick questions for Paris are, someone asked, are there fixed hours to participate in the course each week, or is it kind of self-paced throughout the week? And lastly, will the MOOC include the latest relevant documentation, research, data, and multimedia links within the course?
Yes, so the course is self-paced during the week. As we said, the deadlines are on the Sunday, but throughout the week you can complete activities as you want. And then at the end of the week you have the wrap-up video that the instructor provides the overview of what had happened, but otherwise it's quite self-paced within the week. We won't say self-paced for the entire course, but and then
updated information.
Oh yeah, updated information. Sorry. Yes, the course we've tried to use quite updated resources. We just developed it this year and been using the new resources that UNICEF has provided, their local global reports. So everything is quite relevant and up to date.
Perfect, thank you. And if I can abuse my power as moderator, one of the things I found most interesting in helping to kind of co-develop this course with all the panelists you see here today is that really we tried to bring in a lot of country examples. So I think there's a lot of peer learning from other countries throughout the course. So you'll see kind of in the course readers as well as other materials throughout the course, it'll have examples of here's what country X has done well in this space, and here's a link to a resource that you can use to provide you more information about how that country did it. So even though all of us are speaking to you from kind of headquarters level positions, please be informed that the course really is about sharing some of the best practices that other countries are doing. So you'll have access to that material as well. But I know we are out of time, so I want to thank all of you for joining and to thank our wonderful presenters. We had Eva from UNICEF, Diane and Hannah from IEP, and Yoshi from UNESCO for joining us today. I think it was very informative, and the level of questions that came in really showed the level of interest that there is in this MOOC. So I would encourage, anyone who's tuned in today to register for this MOOC, and also be assured that in the coming days, you will receive recording links to this webinar, both in English and in French, that will also have the registration for the MOOC and all the PowerPoints that we presented today. Thank you so much.